I picked up this Toro 880 riding lawnmower a few weeks ago. Let's see if we can fix it. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Like I mentioned in the intro, I bought this Toro 880 riding lawnmower. I paid $35 for this riding lawnmower. It does have a deck, which you'll see later on. I just wanted to see if I could maybe fix this and flip it. I was originally interested in it because it's kind of a unique tractor. And I say tractor loosely, it's not even a lawn tractor, it's just a riding lawnmower. To me, the differentiation is whether or not it has a PTO and you can run other implements, and also the size. Now, this Toro 880, I found out later on, is somewhat rare. Vintage for sure. It is. It was only made in 1972 and 1973, so there are a limited amount of parts available. Luckily enough, this one was fairly complete. The body didn't seem to be missing any parts. There was nothing major cosmetically. The paint is faded. There's no major rust. I couldn't find anything really missing, so that's a good thing. Originally, the previous owner told me that this was used for 10 years at their family cabin, and then they went to start it up this year, and there was no compression. So I figured this might be an easy fix. I could just flip it and make a few bucks to go towards the next restoration. Once I got in a little bit deeper, I found out there are some issues that need to be corrected. The previous owner did tell me that they were just using the pull starter as the electric starter was not working. There's no battery. Nothing else major seemed to be wrong. So going through, I did check the oil, and there was oil. There was somewhat fresh gas in the tank. I'm assuming that's from when they tried to start it this year. It didn't seem super bad. I took apart the carburetor and looked at the bowl, and it wasn't bad by any means. There was no varnish. I did take it off, and I figured I would clean the carburetor anyways. But I'm just running through some of the preliminary steps trying to confirm what the previous owner told me. I have a jump starter or a battery pack and just ran that straight to the starter. Trying to crank it over, seeing what I could get for compression with my compression tester. And there was nothing, zero compression. So obviously there is an issue there. So right now I'm looking at electrical issue for the starter and mainly lack of compression. Everything else seems to be decent. This is a 8-horse Briggs flathead valve, and I'm suspecting the lack of compression to be a few things mainly related to the valves. So my goal is to just try to open it up and see what we can find. In this video, my main priority is just trying to diagnose some of the issues, trying to figure out exactly what a repair or somewhat of a restoration is going to entail. I kind of want to get a figure for how much I'm going to need to invest in this, and just kind of ballpark figure out whether, there's any money to be made or if I'm doing it purely for the fun of it. Some people will tell you that doing restorations on lawn equipment like this isn't really profitable because there are a certain number of things that would make it counterproductive, i.e., if you need to swap engines or put a new transmission in or something like that. And obviously those are major issues that run the cost up. But for me anyways, I like working on these older machines because if you don't do it, then chances are it's just going to rot away into nothing. And even though I might not make any money on this lawnmower, I keep saying tractor, even though I might not make any money on this lawnmower, to me, it's just fun to do. And, while it would be nice to make some money on it when I flip it, that's not really the primary goal. For me, it's just trying to learn as much as I can about these machines and trying to get them back in a usable state. These are good quality machines, and there's no limit really to what you can put in it to bring it back to its original condition or as close as you can get. Now, ultimately, it's up to you as far as what you consider to be worth it. And to me, like especially for these older machines, it would be different if it was you know a yard machines riding lawnmower from 2005. To me, that doesn't have as much inherent value as some of these older, more unique machines. I just think that they're pretty cool. So I would like to get this back into running condition, and as long as the cost isn't extraordinary, I'm willing to do that in order to give me the chance to learn as much as I can and to bring this back to its former glory. So hopefully, going through our diagnosis, we won't find anything major. A lot of minor things can still add up, but they're usually easily correctable with a little bit of work and diligence. I was able to find the shop manual for this riding lawnmower on the Toro website, so that's a bonus when it comes to ordering parts, or especially when it comes to putting parts back on, just making sure that I have everything in the right place. So originally I'm thinking the paint isn't bad. There's a little bit of rust. I might, try to clean it up and paint some spots as needed. But my initial thought was that this is a pretty solid riding lawnmower. If I can get it running, then I might just consider that good enough and stop there. So, like I said before, I wanted to take the carb apart and give it a thorough cleaning just to kind of eliminate that when we get to trying to run this engine. I just wanted to take that out of the mix and not be concerned that the fuel would be an issue. I'd hate to put in all this work and figure out what's going on and overlook something simple like the carburetor. So I am taking it apart. I'm going to clean it in my ultrasonic cleaner. This carburetor gave me a little bit of trouble. I can tell that somebody was in there before. The main jet was completely stripped out, so I was not able to take out the main jet. I soaked it in the ultrasonic cleaner with the jet in there, and hopefully that cleaned it as well as it could. It's just not worth it to cause further damage, and like the brass jet was disintegrating every time I tried to unthread it, and I could tell. I could tell that right from the get-go because somebody had been in there and it was already partially stripped. So, if I had to, I could probably pick up a cheap Chinese carb for this, and if fuel is the issue going down the road, then maybe that's something that I'll do. I haven't priced out a new carburetor, but they're usually fairly inexpensive, so in the grand scheme of things, it's not the end of the world. I should mention, too, that one of the reasons why I was leaning towards cleaning this carburetor is because I had to take it off anyways. The valve cover was situated right behind the carburetor, and I thought that in order for me to get better access, it would just behoove me to take it off from the beginning rather than trying to struggle. And if I was going to take it off, I may as well clean it. So that was kind of the deciding factor for why I wanted to clean it, even though it didn't look terrible. I am going to I already have purchased a gasket set, so I'm not really being too careful about saving gaskets. This machine is 48 years old, so I think that we can probably be okay replacing the gaskets. I paid $17 for, I think it was $17.99 for a gasket set, so to me, that's money well worth it, and I'm okay paying that. And as this project goes forward, I'm keeping track of how much I'm spending, so that way I have an idea of how much I have invested total. As we go through the videos, I will update you on how much I've spent. So like I mentioned before, I'm thinking initially that because of the lack of compression is probably related to the valves. Either a valve is stuck, or there's a valve is thrown the seat, or possibly a blown head gasket. And worst case scenario is if there is damaged rings on the piston. That could potentially, mar up the cylinder, and then we'd be looking at reboring the cylinder or getting a new cylinder or doing an engine swap, or some of the more costly repairs. So hopefully it's not that. Head gaskets are super easy to do. If it's a stuck valve, then it's a matter of figuring out why it's stuck and what kind of damage was done. The flywheel turns over manually. There's no compression. You can feel it when you're turning it over, but it doesn't seem like there's a stuck valve. So I'm kind of leaning towards, initially I'm thinking it's a head gasket or a valve seat. That's the issue. So I popped open the valve cover just to take a look, thinking maybe there's a bent rod or some kind of issue, and I guess I didn't have the camera set up perfectly, so you can't even really see the valves, but the exhaust valve is on the bottom, and I'm not seeing anything really major, so I was kind of hoping I wouldn't have to take the head off, but that's the only way I can really see the valves in the seats, and possibly if there was a problem with the head gasket. So that's going to be the next step. Unfortunately, to do that, I have to remove part of the body, and it's at this point that I'm thinking, well, maybe, if I got to take apart a decent amount of this machine just to get at the engine, to diagnose it, maybe it would be best to think about doing a more thorough kind of a restoration. I'm not really going to call it a full-blown restoration, because I don't think I'm going to strip all the paint and repaint everything. I still haven't decided at this point, but the fact is that I have to remove a decent amount of the machine just to get at the engine and diagnose it. So already this is turning into a little bit bigger of a project than I was intending, but that's okay. I'm not against that. If that helps this machine get back to its former glory, then, like I said, that's all worth it to me. I'm under no deadlines. This isn't for a customer or anything. This is just me doing something I like to do on my part-time. So I'm going to start taking apart the body here just to open up space, so that way I can get the head off, and then that way I can inspect the head gasket and the valves and see what we can find. So as part of the diagnosis, I'd like to try to figure out, well, if I can figure out what the problem is, well, then what caused it? Or if I could figure out the cause of the issue, then that helps me diagnose what's actually wrong. In the case of a no compression engine, some of the more common things that we've discussed as being issues, for example, head gasket or a valve seat that's become loose. Some of those issues are due commonly, and piston ring damage for that matter. Some of those issues are commonly due to overheating. A lot of these engines, and this one in particular, are air-cooled. So the flywheel will spin and draw air in, which runs over the fins of the engine to help keep it cool. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, rodents and other creatures like to make their nests in unused lawn equipment, such as this, usually under the tins of the engine shroud or pretty much any little space that they can get. And it's kind of remarkable where they can build their nests and what small spaces they can occupy. So, and I guess I would have been leaning towards that direction if I had seen evidence of it. This is a fairly clean machine. There's no real evidence of nesting going on. Usually it's pouring out of the engine compartment or some of the tins, and you can kind of see where it's going to be an issue. The air cleaner was super clean. It looked like it was brand new. So that's one less piece that I need to purchase. There's no nesting in the air cleaner. So there wasn't really a lot of evidence towards that being the issue. unless the previous owner had cleaned it, trying to get it started. That could certainly be the case. It very well could have overheated and caused some issue, and now we're experiencing a lack of compression. So the only way we're going to find out is by taking this machine apart. And, you know, initially when I first started working on engines, I was leery about taking engines apart because I thought it was going to be this super complicated, difficult procedure, and it's really not. I mean, sure, there are complex engines out there, and there are still plenty where I'm leery of taking them apart, but and that's one of the reasons why I like working on these older machines too, is not only for the nostalgic value or the fact that I think that these older machines are cooler than newer machines, but they're also simpler. So at this infancy of my education and working on machines, it's easier for me to work on a simpler machine. It has less bells and whistles, less things to go wrong, less things to diagnose. At the very basic state, this is a simple engine. It requires compression, air-fuel mix, and spark. If you've got those three things, the engine should work. If you don't, it probably isn't going to work. So it's a simple matter of figuring out which one of those three, potentially more than one, is causing the issue. So as I go about taking apart these body pieces and the frame, I'm just trying to make a note of where each bolt and nut go. Even though I do have the shop manual and it has a parts diagram, it's very basic. Where there's a bolt, for instance, it'll say bolt. It won't tell you the size or any other information about which bolt you're talking about. So I'm trying to remember which ones are for the body and which ones are for the engine. I'm trying to keep everything separate. And that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video, is just to help me remember and document where all the parts go. So that way when the time comes to put it back together, hopefully I'll be able to get everything back in the right order. At this point, I was getting tired of fighting with the hood. It was constantly in the way, so I decided now would be an appropriate time to just remove it. 4 bolts, 2 on each side, and the hood was able to come off easily and give me better access for taking apart the rest of the frame that covers the engine. Once that's all apart, I can finally get at the head just to see what's wrong in the first place. I wanted to remove the oil since I was going to be opening up the head and I didn't want to leak oil everywhere. So as you can see here, there is oil in this machine. There's not a ton. It was probably low, and everything it is in there is very dark, pretty viscous. So it was due for an oil change anyways. We'll take care of that once we get everything fixed up, and hopefully this thing will be a nice running machine. Another thing that was bothering me too is this seat. So the previous owner told me that the owner before him was a rather large man. He said he was a 300-pound dude. So he made this kind of custom bracket to extend the height on the seat and gave it some more reinforcement to, support his weight. This machine is rather small, and when I'm sitting in the seat, it is tight. I'm 6'2", so I can see why he wanted to do that, but to me it looked hideous. It wasn't original. It was some kind of a Frankenstein looking seat. So I just wanted to remove it. And since we're kind of leaning towards taking off more and more of this machine, before you know it, we're going to have this thing completely stripped down. The seat I wanted to repair back to the original way it looked anyways. I'm not going to replace this seat. It is in pretty good condition. There's one small hole in it that I'm just going to fix. It's not worth buying a whole new seat for it. So finally, now that the frame rails have been removed, I can take apart the head and see if we can find out what's wrong. And again, based on the symptoms of having no compression, I'm assuming, since I haven't found any nesting material up to this point, I'm assuming that when I take this shroud off, there's going to be a ton of it that comes falling out. But when I actually get this shroud off, I find to my surprise, it's pretty clean. So there's nothing really giving me a clear indication of why this machine has suffered, presumably, from no compression. I mean, there's no obvious answer at this point. So even though I like to find out a reason why, or a theory or form a hypothesis, it's just there's none for this particular machine at this point. I don't even know what's wrong with it still. So let's just get this head off and see what we can find. Alright, so with the rubber mallet, I'm able to take the head off, and I'm trying to conserve the head gasket at this point, not because I want to reuse it, but I want to see if there's any obvious blowouts that would indicate a blown head gasket. There is a lot of carbon on the head, and that's not to be expected, or I should say that's not unexpected. Given a machine this age, if it did have any sort of overheating, it would probably have carbon buildup. Well, what I noticed right off the bat is, and you can't really see it very good from this picture, but there is a thrown valve seat. The exhaust valve seat has come loose. So that would be an obvious answer for why there's no compression. If there's no seal there, there's no way for the pressure to build up and have compression. So I'm assuming at this point that that's the cause, and that gives me a little bit of hope because that matched my hypothesis for one of the potential causes for the no compression. So it's reassuring for me to find a diagnosis that matches my theory at this point. So I'm thinking, okay, all I have to do is remove the valve, and then I can dimple the valve seat, or actually dimple the block around the valve seat, so that way it'll spread the metal out and cause more friction, which should hold the valve seat back in place, in theory. While I've got the head off, I'm also going to be cleaning everything. I want to get rid of as much of that carbon as I can. I'm going to clean the valve. Like I said, I am going to replace the gasket. I just brought it inside so that way I can make sure when the new gasket comes that it's the right gasket. So I'm just cleaning everything up with a Scotch-Brite pad, trying to do a thorough job as I can. I'm going to be using my drill with a brass wire brush for actually cleaning the head, and I'm also going to take it over and clean the intake valve and also the piston, just to clean off any of that residual carbon and leftover gasket material. And it was kind of at this point that I started looking at it, because when I was messing around with the valve, I would be manually turning over the flywheel. And so the piston would be extending. And it was kind of at this point that I noticed there was some residual oil that would track along with it. Now, oil shouldn't really be getting above the piston. If that's the case, you would have a smoky machine when it's running because it's burning oil at the same time. So that tells me that there is some sort of piston ring damage. It could just be age, or if this machine did overheat, it could have damaged the piston rings in addition to the valve seat. So I looked at the cylinder and there's a little bit of scoring, nothing that is really alarming, but it's still something that I want to take care of. So because, again, at this point, I kind of figure that I'm going to have to take apart the engine I want to rehone the cylinder wall and replace the piston rings. So I'm looking at a somewhat involved procedure just to take everything apart. And I figured that at this point, I may as well just take the whole machine apart and give it a good cleaning, I think I'm going to repaint it. I bought some paint. I'm not sure how that's going to turn out, but some of the white on the grill was totally faded. The white on the tire rims was faded, and the Toro red was super faded. It was more like I don't know, it's still red, but it's not the right color. So I'm thinking that I'd like to go through and if I'm going to be this involved already, I kind of want to make this machine as pretty as it can be. So that's my plan. Is I'm going to disassemble this machine. I'm going to clean it as best I can, in addition to working on the engine and making sure that we've got a good running engine. So this project is going to take me a few different videos. In this one, like I said, we're just diagnosing it. I think we've got a fairly substantial grasp of what is wrong with it. We still need to work out what's wrong with the starter. The previous owner says that the starter works, it's just really weak. So I don't know why that would be. It looked like some of the wiring was kind of cobbled together, so I'm going to go through and replace a lot of the wiring. It was very old and frayed and cracked and who knows. So I'm just going to replace a lot of that. So in the next couple of videos of this project, I'll be disassembling it, cleaning, painting, reassembling, working on the engine, and then doing the same thing to the deck. I want to make that nice and clean and match too. So I've ordered a few parts. Like I said, the gasket set was $17.99. I bought piston rings, and those were, I think, $8.95. What else did I get? Let's see here. I bought a new boot for the spark plug. I bought paint. Paint was a big one. I think I spent right around 40 or 50 bucks on paint. So I added everything up, and including the $35 that I spent to purchase this machine, all in so far I'm at $122. So I'm figuring that if this machine is back in running, working condition, given the fact that it's a smaller riding machine, smaller riding mower, I'm going to say it's probably around $250 to $300. Perhaps I can get a little bit more of that just because it is unique, and who knows, it might appeal to somebody's nostalgia. But I'm not expecting a huge return on this, so I'd like to keep my overall investment under $150 if possible. At the most, $200. That way, at least, I can be fairly confident that I'll at least break even and, have a fun project in the meantime. So, like I said, let's just clean up this cylinder head. I'm using some Scotch-Brite and then a little bit of 400 grit sandpaper, wet and dry, just to clean off this carbon. I want to have a good surface for the new gasket to adhere to. And then once this is all done, then I can go ahead and start taking care of that valve seat. So I didn't get a great shot of dimpling the block, but you can see the dimples here that I did with a punch, make them equidistant around the valve seat just to hold pressure on it, and hopefully that'll do the trick just to keep it in there. So then all it's left to do is to grind the valve just to make sure that it's got a nice seat on the seat. So just using some grinding paste, I'm going to work at grinding this valve to make sure everything fits good. So that's pretty much going to wrap up this video. Like I said, I'm fairly confident that we've diagnosed the issue. Next is going to be disassembling the entire machine. So that'll be the next video in this series, and then we'll work on figuring out if there's more damage that needs to get repaired, working on the body, trying to get some of that stuff painted, and after that we'll be able to reassemble the engine with some of the new parts that I got, go through and test and rewire everything, and then hopefully put everything back together and have a super cool running machine. So if you have any questions or comments on this video, please leave me a note in the comment section below. And until next time, thanks for watching.